Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome to today's reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll start with the invocation prayers. Om Jnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namom Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. So today we are reading from Canto number 3, um, chapter 27, verse number 21. Give me 1 second while I adjust my screen here. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Animitta Nimittena Swadharmena Amala Atmana Tivraya Mai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Sambratya Sambrataya Chiram. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha Animitta Nimittena Swadharmena Amalatmana Tivraya Mai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Sambrataya Chiram. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha Animitta Nimittena Swadharmena Amalatmana Tivraya Mai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Samrataya Chiram. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Animitta Nimittena Swadharmena Amalatmana Tivraya Mai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Samrataya Chiram. Synonyms here. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Animitta Nimittena, without desiring the fruits of activities, Swadharmena, by executing one's prescribed duties, Amala Atmana, with a pure mind, Tivraya, serious, Mai, unto me, Bhaktya, by devotional service, Cha, and Shruta, hearing, Sambrataya, endowed with, Chiram, for a long time. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. I'll read the translation once again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sridhar Swami comments in this connection that by association with material nature alone, one does not become conditioned. Conditional life begins only after one is infected by the modes of material nature. If someone is in contact with the police department, that does not mean that he is a criminal. As long as one does not commit criminal acts, even though there is a police department, he is not punished. Similarly, the liberated soul is not affected, although he is in material nature. Even the Supreme Personality of Godhead is supposed to be in association with material nature when he descends, but he is not affected. One has to act in such a way that, in spite of being in the material nature, he is not affected by contamination. Although the lotus flower is in association with water, it does not mix with water. That is how one has to live, as described here by the personality of Godhead, Kapila Deva. One can be liberated from all adverse circumstances simply by seriously engaging in devotional service. How this devotional service develops and becomes mature is explained here. In the beginning, one has to perform his prescribed duties with a clean mind. Clean consciousness means Krishna consciousness. One has to perform his prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. There is no necessity of changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness. In discharging Krishna conscious duties, one should determine whether, by his professional or occupational duties, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is satisfied. In another place in the Bhagavatam, it is said, Swanustitasya dharmasya samsiddhir haditoshanam. Everyone has some prescribed duties to perform, but the perfection of such duties will be reached only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is satisfied by such actions. For example, Arjuna's prescribed duty was to fight, and the perfection of his fighting was tested by the satisfaction of Krishna. Krishna wanted him to fight, and when he fought for the satisfaction of the Lord, that was the perfection of his professional devotional duty. On the other hand, when, contrary to the wish of Krishna, he is not willing to fight, that was imperfect. If one wants to perfect his life, he should discharge his prescribed duties for the satisfaction of Krishna. One must act in Krishna consciousness, for such action will never produce any reaction. Animitta nimittena. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Yajnartat karmano anyatra. All activities should be performed simply for yajna or the satisfaction of Vishnu. Anything done otherwise without the satisfaction of Vishnu or yajna produces bondage. So, here it is prescribed by Kapila Muni that one can transcend material entanglement by acting in Krishna consciousness, which means seriously engaging in devotional service. This serious devotional service can develop by hearing for long periods of time. Chanting and hearing is the beginning of the process of devotional service. One should associate with devotees and hear from them about the Lord's transcendental appearance, activities, disappearance, instructions, etc. There are two kinds of Shruti or scriptures. One is spoken by the Lord, and the other is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. Bhagavad Gita is the former, and Srimad Bhagavatam the latter. One must hear the scriptures repeatedly from reliable sources in order to become fixed in serious devotional service. Through engagement in such devotional service, one becomes freed from the contamination of Maya. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead cleanses the heart of all contamination caused by the influence of the three modes of material nature. By continuous regular hearing, the effects of the contamination of lust and greed to enjoy or lord it over material nature diminish. And when lust and greed diminish, one then becomes situated in the mode of goodness. This is the stage of Brahman realization or spiritual realization. In this way, one becomes fixed on the transcendental platform. Remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. Jai. So, such a beautiful purport and very dense purport. Again, a lot of the teachings from Bhagavad Gita we can see here. So, in this particular verse, this is again Kapila Dev speaking to Mother Devahoti. And essentially, we get a flavor of the power of association from this particular verse. So, by executing one's prescribed duties in such a way that A, there is devotional service. That means we are doing things that are favorable in a mood of service to Krishna. And then also adding hearing about Krishna or hearing instructions from Krishna is the formula that is being described here about how to disentangle oneself from this modes of material nature or material entanglement. And if we were to execute one's prescribed duties in a way that we continue our devotional service and that we continue to hear with good quality and long periods of time about Krishna and from Krishna, then there will be no reactions and one will be free from the contamination of matter. So, again, that is the um, thesis of this particular verse here. And Srila Prabhupada is giving a very nice, is quoting Sridhar Swami here. I really like the example of just by association with the police department, one doesn't become a criminal, right? And in the same way that um, the matter is also an energy of Krishna, and in that sense, it is not contaminated. So Krishna has multifaceted energies, right? Parashya Saktir, Vividaiva, Shruyate. And so, in that sense, um, it is not the matter per se, but it is the tendency to enjoy matter and misidentify with matter, which is really what the bondage is about or the contamination is about. And how do we purify? How do we purify ourselves? And Srila Prabhupada talks about uh, having purity and cleanliness. So, purity of actions, purity of words, purity of thought, purity of mind, purity of consciousness. And how do we get to that stage of purification is what is also described in this purport. So, matter in itself is not contaminated. Matter used in the service of Krishna is not only not contaminating, but is also uplifting. So, the question that we have to ask is, who am I serving through my actions? Literally, that is the answer to which will determine our state of our consciousness. And again, it has to be a honest introspection because as practitioners, as devotees, sometimes we may be performing devotional activities, but not necessarily with the mood of service, right? Sometimes we use devotional service as a beating stick or as a stick, as something to establish um, something that is ulterior, that is not necessarily in a mood of service to either the other person or for the pleasure of Guru and Krishna. So again, honest introspection about who am I serving through my actions. That is really important. And on the extreme materialistic side, um, we can say that each of us have two pockets, at least not necessarily extreme materialistic side, but somewhere in the beginning stages, we may have one pocket for me, one pocket for Krishna, right? A nickel for me, a nickel for Krishna, a nickel for me, a nickel for Krishna, a nickel for me, and a nickel for me. And so we make these binary decisions about how much we want to put in the Krishna pocket and how much we want to put in our own pocket. Um, Prabhupada also gives an example of Arjuna, how as a Kshatriya, his duty was to fight based on his psychophysical nature. That was his duty. And the situation also called for his service as a Kshatriya to fight. Now, the fighting, because Arjuna fought for Krishna, he became famous and his fighting is glorified. And on the other hand, his not wanting to fight was actually an imperfection, is what Srila Prabhupada is saying. So again, the fundamental question here is Krishna pleased or is he satisfied? And Srila Prabhupada also talks about yajna, that all activities are to be performed as a sacrifice to Vishnu or Krishna. Anything that is done otherwise actually causes bondage. So that is again the formula here for how do we disentangle ourselves from bondage is by placing our consciousness in the mood of service and understanding very clearly and reminding ourselves from time to time as we even when we before we start to engage these activities on you know this is a service that we are performing for whom we are performing the service and for the pleasure of whom we are performing this particular service. Uh, so, another word that is used um, in this, sorry, another word that is used in this verse is tivraya. So, tivraya is serious. So, this serious discharge of devotional service. Now, um, Srila Prabhupada, not just Srila Prabhupada, but in this particular verse, we see that Kapila Dev is saying that we can um, we can get uh, we can get this mode of consciousness, or we can situate ourselves in this mode of consciousness of pleasing Krishna and being in a mood of service by serious cultivation of devotional service. And the serious cultivation of devotional service is actually as a very simple formula. Um, and the simple formula is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So again, uh, the uh, seriousness of devotional service doesn't require some, extreme austerities. The seriousness just requires serious commitment. And also the formula is very additive, as in it adds on. We just have to take the first step and then the second step and the third step, and we derive strength from the first step and the second step to reach the third step, and we derive strength from the third step to reach the fourth step. So again, we start with hearing, which is what is being emphasized um, in this particular verse. So Shravanam, which is, as Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada spiritual master, translates that giving oral reception to the holy name and descriptions, form, qualities, entourage, and pastimes. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about there are two kinds of Shruti. One is by the Lord, and the second is of the Lord. So the instructions or Shruti uh, by the Lord is our Bhagavad Gita, and the Shruti of the Lord is Srimad Bhagavatam. And then these Tivra or the seriousness uh, also comes in when we hear these instructions from the Supreme Lord or descriptions of the names and the fames and the pastimes and the glories of the Supreme Lord through reliable sources. And not just reliable sources, uh, hearing through reliable sources, but also repeatedly hearing for long periods of time. Because again, our association of with matter and this self-indulgence is also been around for a very long time. So the antidote is long is equally for a long time. We also need to be immersed in that association with uh, both hearing about Krishna and hearing from Krishna. Now, Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita, Mama Maya Durataya. And again, the formula is again straightforward here. The Although the energy, this energy of Krishna, Maya, is insurmountable. The way to get around that is also um, not necessarily extremely complex. It is through starting with hearing and chanting of the holy names of the Lord. Uh, the stages in which one develops this tivra spirit or seriousness in devotional service is also described in this purport by Srila Prabhupada. A, how do we understand that the effectiveness of our hearing and chanting is A, by understanding that lust and greed slowly starts to diminish. And then as lust and greed slowly starts to diminish, one gets situated in this mode of goodness. And from the mode of goodness, one is able to access transcendence more easily. So there's attachment to Krishna and detachment with matter. So this is what happens. So we first focus on attachment with Krishna or attachment to spirit, spiritual, and then automatically the detachment from matter automatically happens. So that is the param drishva nivartate. Now, just on the association, on the topic of association, again, we have really good instructions from the Nectar of Instructions by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Upadeshamrita. Again, verse number 2 talks about atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyam cha shadbir bhakti vinashyati. So of all this, there's six different items that destroy bhakti. Again, there is associating with worldly minded persons that is being listed there. The Again, it's not the people per se, but it is um, the energy or the, let's say, the topics of conversation that essentially helps uh, not does not allow us to actually latch on to the spirit. So again, very carefully guarding association. And then again, in the verse 3, what are the six principles that are favorable? That is utsaha nishchaya dhairyat tattat karma pravartanad sangatyagat sato vritte sadbir bhakti prasiddhyati. So in this case, the tat karma pravartanat, which is what the focus of this particular verse is, which is various activities that are favorable for the cultivation of devotional service, starting with Shravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. And then similarly, the Sattvavrite part, which is following the footsteps of the previous acharyas or devotees who are following the footsteps of those who are following the footsteps of their acharyas. Um, so with that, I will stop and see if there are any comments or thoughts. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.